Edelman, founder and president. You can go ahead and clap. Founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, has been an advocate for disadvantaged Americans for her entire professional life. The Children's Defense Fund's Leave No Child Behind mission is to ensure that every single child receives a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, a safe start, and a moral start in life, and successful passage to adulthood with the help of caring families and communities. Mrs. Edelman, a graduate of Spelman College right here in Atlanta and Yale Law School, began her career in the mid-1960s when, as the first African-American woman admitted to the Mississippi bar, she directed the NAACP's Legal Defense and Education Fund office in Jackson, Mississippi. In 1968, she moved to Washington, D.C. as counsel for the Poor People's Campaign that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. began right before his untimely death. She founded the Washington Research Project, a public interest law firm, and the parent body of the Children's Defense Fund. For 2 years, she served as director of the Center for Law and Education at Harvard, and in 1973, she began CDF. She has received over 100 honorary degrees and many awards, including the Albert Schweitzer Humanitarian Prize, the Heinz Award, a MacArthur Foundation Prize Fellowship, the Robert F. Kennedy Lifetime Achievement Award for her writings, and in the year 2000, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award. Please welcome a true civil rights leader and pioneer and advocate, Mrs. Marian Wright Edelman.
Thank you. I am very, very honored to be here, and I thank Peter Groff for his leadership. I thank all of you for what you are doing in the battleground for the future of the nation. Public education is the battleground for the future and soul of America, and you are trying so hard in the charter school movement to be a piece of the solution, and I'm deeply grateful to you, and I'm very glad to be here. I like the theme of your conference, that every child can succeed. Poor and minority children can do anything any children can do, and that belief, it must never get lost. And I hope that you will continue to remember that. When I grew up in my rural segregated school system in Bennettsville, South Carolina, our teachers, you know, we had secondhand books in the library of white kids, and everything was secondhand. But the community teachers and the church leaders and the parents in our community told us that we would learn and they would never give up on us, and I hope that that child-centric approach to making sure that every child succeeds and believes in themselves will be one that you carry forth. After parents, you're perhaps the most important forces in shaping the lives and hopes and aspirations of our children, and take that seriously, realizing all the time that one, children don't come in pieces, that children need a continuum of care. Poverty, educational poverty, health poverty, educational poverty all go hand in hand, and the most important thing is the high expectations. And we must always be mindful of the role we as parents and as teachers and as other leaders do, because children do what we do. We do not have a child problem in America, we have a profound adult problem, and so if we adults can get it together. We're in the city of Atlanta, where 50 years ago we could not imagine what we are seeing today. And as a student at Spelman College and as a part of the civil rights movement, it's just always miraculous to come back and see how much Atlanta has changed, but it seemed impossible. And I hope as we go forward to build this new movement for the human rights of every child to a first-rate, high-quality education, that you will simply not give up. And since you're in the city of Dr. King, I do urge that you take a half hour, as I always do when I come to Atlanta, to go over and visit and to be there and to realize and to begin to figure out how we're going to carry on and do that second transformative movement to put the social and economic underpinnings beneath the political and civil rights for which he and so many led us. On the day in which he was assassinated, he called his mother from Memphis and told her his next Sunday's sermon title and it was why America is going to hell. And he said America is going to go to hell if we don't use her vast resources to end poverty and to make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life. The day after Dr. King was shot, riots of despair and hopelessness occurred all over America, and they occurred in the nation's capital, where I had just moved to help develop the policy positions of the Poor People's Campaign. And kids were looting, neighborhoods were burning, and I went out into the public schools in the District of Columbia to tell the children not to riot and not to loot and not to get arrested and ruin their futures. And a little boy, black boy, about 12, looked at me straight in the eye and said, "Lady, what future? I ain't got no future. I ain't got nothing to lose." And I have spent the last 40 years and will spend the rest of my life trying to prove that boy's truth wrong. I had no idea how hard it would be, for this boy saw and spoke the plain truth for himself and millions of others like him in our money-rich, militarily powerful, but morally anemic, race, gender, and income stratified society. We have got to change that. We've got to change it through the schools, but we have got to change it through all of us coming together out of our silos to build a transforming movement in this new era to change the values of our nation. Despite great progress for some over the last 40 and 50 years, so much peril remains to snuff out the hopes and dreams of children like him. And I would just recommend again that we don't reinvent the wheels, that there have been many, many reform efforts, there are many things we can learn from history. And so reread Dr. King, because we are redefining Dr. King in so many ways. And I am so worried today, which I see as one of the most dangerous times for children, for poor children, and especially for minority children of color, who are facing a new threat called incarceration, or what we at the Children's Defense Fund call the cradle-to-prison pipeline. We've got to break it up. We've got to see it, we've got to name it, we've got to change it, because incarceration is becoming the new American apartheid, and poor children of color are the fodder. And as educators, you must see it, understand it, sound the alarm, and make sure that this threat to American unity and community stops. We've got to stop the growing criminalization of children at younger and younger ages. Schools are a major feeder system into the cradle-to-prison pipeline. We've got to challenge low expectations, poor quality education in charters and in traditional public schools. Children are entitled to a quality education wherever they are, and that's why you've got to insist on that being true. And we've got to tackle zero-tolerance discipline problems. Sometimes I think adults have lost their common sense, and we're putting children out of school because they're truant or tardy. We're putting children out of school and expelling them for nonviolent offenses that used to be settled in the principal's office. We're sending them off into the prison pipeline. Let's stop it. Let's figure out what the problems of the children are. Let's get them on a trajectory of hope. And let's keep them out of our juvenile justice and criminal justice systems, and we've got to really see that our failure to act now to deal with this criminalization of children, the poor education that feeds into this criminal justice problem, is going to undermine the social and racial progress of the last 50 years that Dr. King and so many others died and sacrificed for, and weaken our future capacity to lead. So all of us, in all sectors as adults who care about children, must put into place a continuum of care from birth through their successful transition to adulthood, remembering Frederick Douglass's correct observation that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. We have to have a major paradigm shift in this country, away from punishment and into prevention and early intervention. Thank all of you who worked on health care for all children. We've got to make sure that they actually get it now, because health care is an education issue. If the child can't see and hear the teachers, can't see the blackboard, have undiagnosed emotional problems or attention deficit problems, that's an education issue. We've got to all put into place a high-quality early childhood system, because what happens in those first 3 and 5 years of life we know is going to help set a trajectory, and we've all got to come together with that and make sure that we put that system in place. We have a new federal blueprint for education reform that talks about K-12, but we've got to make sure that the K step is fixed and strong. Only 10 states have full-day kindergarten. That's not a step to begin up. We've got to have a major campaign for high-quality, full-day kindergarten all over America, even as we try to make sure that those first years are in place. We've got to understand that what goes on out of school and out of school after the school day and on weekends and in the summer matters. We've just finished training 1,300 young people who are out running 151 freedom schools around the country, because we know that what goes on in school is a major contributing factor, with low expectations and poor quality education, to the achievement gap. But what goes on out of school in the summer and after school drives the achievement gap too. And I'm so pleased that all of these college students, 90% of whom are Black and Latino, are stepping up to the plate to reclaim children's time in the summer, to show them that college is something that's possible. And we've got to all work together to reach critical mass, and I hope we can make some more common cause and partnerships between our freedom schools and charter schools, as we are with public schools. And one goal we have is to see that there's a freedom school on every Black college campus, so that children will see college, not prison, in their future. You can't aspire what you don't know. And I love the focus on college of Kip and many others, but we've got to do more, because we're all just, again, a drop in the bucket of the need of what's got to happen if we're going to transform the priorities of the country. So I'm delighted to be here, and I want to talk very much about the need to pick up where Dr. King and the civil rights movement left off, because education is the civil rights issue, the human rights issue of this time, and we've all got to be mindful of the responsibilities that we have to get it right, to do it right, because so much is at stake. And we can learn an awful lot, and while we focus on reading and writing and math and high expectations, we also need to begin to be clear about our history and teach our children our history. Let them know that they are empowered and that they can change things. And they know, all of our freedom school children read Little Ruby Bridges and see what she did at 6. They read about the sit-in movement. They read about what went on in freedom rides. And education today is the freedom ride and the sit-in movement of this era. It's hard, it takes courage, it takes perseverance, it takes collaboration, but just be mindful of the responsibility that we have in shaping the lives of millions of children, and of really beginning, hopefully, to shape the values of this nation. So many Americans would rather celebrate than follow Dr. King. And many have enshrined the dreamer, Dr. King, but ignored Dr. King, the disturber of all unjust peace. Many celebrate Dr. King, the orator, but ignore the critical words and warnings about the needs for reordering the misguided values and priorities he believed were the seeds of America's future destruction. Many remember Dr. King, the vocal opponent of violence, but not the King who called for massive, nonviolent civil disobedience to challenge the stockpiling of weapons of death and the wars they fuel, and the excessive materialism of the greedy, which deprive the needy of the basic necessities of life. And look how far we have come down the road he warned us against. Look at our budget fight. We've had the largest redistribution of wealth from the poor up to the rich and the middle class up to the rich, and there's still not enough. We're all fighting budget cuts in early education and nutrition programs. My goodness, we have a major values problem, but we have a major voice problem, and all of us have to be a part of building a new voice for a new set of values and a new set of priorities in our nation. We must turn back the extraordinary backwards movement to take from those at the bottom who need most, and we must not trivialize or sanitize Dr. King's words. Most of us would much rather build a monument, name a street or a school after him, than to really engage in the sacrificial action and movement building that he called for. And many would like to freeze him in the eloquent dream speech of 1963 and forget all the nightmares and the consistent struggles that followed. So go over there and visit him at the King Center and meditate on his life, read his words, share his books with your own churches and synagogues and mosques and with your children. Let them know what children in a sacrificial group of people who didn't have a whole lot of resources did to change the face of legal apartheid in our country, and now we must realize the next part of that dream, which is educated, prepared children who can seize the future. He resisted those who wanted to compartmentalize his interests and his opposition to the war. But look at all the debate that's going on now as if the budget deficit has been caused by children and by poor people. The budget deficit has been caused by the same thing that caused them back in the era of Dr. King. It was the Vietnam War. It was the war. It's the wars. It's the tax cuts. We've got to frame the issue. We have got to reframe the issue of what deficit is most threatening to America's security. The greatest threat to America's national security does not lie from something without. It lies from our failure to invest in the health and education of every child, not from any enemy without. And it's the human deficit that is our problem. It's the moral deficit that is our problem. And we have got to have a voice and let our children understand what's at stake and engage our parents and all of that. You know, many of us are waiting for Dr. King to come back. He's not. We're it. And so we really, in this city, in this important time, with your important work, we need to realize that we are it in terms of the next phase of the transforming movement, and all of us have got to step up to the plate. And I would just take 2 or 3 of the lessons from his life that I got out of Spelman College when I first heard him speak, that I think we've got to remember. And the first thing he was very clear about was the need to take the first step, even if you can't see the whole stairway. When I first heard him, take the first step, sow your seeds, and leave the results to God. Let's take risk. Let's don't be afraid of being criticized. If you don't want to be criticized, don't say anything, don't do anything, don't be anything. We've got to build a movement for children, which means we have to get out of our silos, but we also have to get out of our comfort zones. When Birmingham came about, he was chartered by white religious leaders, and he wrote them a letter, and I would really commend that we teach that letter in our schools. But he talked about the need for thermostat leaders rather than thermometer leaders. And he talked about people who hold up their hands, look at the political winds, and then try to follow them. But what he said we needed was thermostat leaders who will set the temperature and set the context. And we've got to again change the debate, and we hope that all of you will be thermostat leaders and will teach children to be thermostat leaders and to look at what the children did. When he came out of the Birmingham jail, he called to fill up the jails. And I never will forget the scene with the children were the only ones who stood up when he said fill up the jails. And it was the children of Birmingham marching and standing up to the hoses and to the fire hoses and to the dogs that brought down Bull Connor. So children need to be empowered to know that they can make a difference. So civic education and civic engagement and service is important as reading, and they've got to read. They've got to compute at the highest possible levels, and they've got to be prepared, but we have got to also teach them to be empowered young people and to build strong children inside. And so I thank you for what you're doing. I want to end very briefly because my sister sends me clippings, and she sent me an old clipping, which I've been using a lot this year, on the lessons from an anonymous critic that all of us, she said, could learn from Noah's Ark. And so I want to share a few of those lessons from Noah's Ark and one last quote from Dr. King and go away. The first lesson from Noah's Ark is don't miss the boat. And the United States is going to miss the boat to lead and compete in our globalizing world because we are not preparing a majority of our children for the future. The greatest threat, as I've indicated, to national security is not from without, is within those classrooms as you're dealing with, is in those communities and with the children that you're working with. Every 11 seconds of every school day, a child drops out of school. Every 32 seconds, a baby is born into poverty. Majority of children in all racial and income groups, just think about it. We say these words all the time, but think about the implications that a majority of all children in all racial and income groups cannot read or compute proficiently in 4th, 8th, or 12th grade, and over 80% of Black and Latino children cannot read or compute proficiently in 4th, 8th, or 12th grade. If they have not already dropped out of school, and we know the 40% dropout rates for minority and children of color, this is a disaster. If your children can't read in this globalizing world, they're being sentenced to social and economic death. They're being sentenced to the prison pipeline. So I just can't re-emphasize how grateful I am for your witness, how important it is that you do your job right. Every child has got to learn how to read and write. You are shaping the future hopes of millions of children like that child I met 40 years ago. Lesson 2 from Noah's Ark is we are all in the same boat. And we have all these folk who somehow think that they can build gates that are going to be high enough that nobody can get across them. The middle class and the rich, we become divided. The gap between rich and poor is the highest ever recorded. But any American who thinks he doesn't have any self-interest in educating poor and minority children, who will be a majority of our child population by 2019, is whistling Dixie. We've got to begin to understand that not only are all of our children sacred, we need them all to have a strong and productive workforce and to compete with all the folk around the world. I mean, we are now spending, we've lost our moral compass and our common sense compass. We're spending 3 times more on average in our states per prisoner than per public school pupil. I can't think of a dumber investment policy. That's why we've got to have a movement and why we've got to change the priority. The third lesson from Noah's Ark is to plan ahead. It wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And we know that tomorrow is today, and the children have only one childhood. We have to fight these budget cuts because some cuts don't heal. Children have only one time if their medical needs are not diagnosed, and we lose too many children from things that we could prevent. If you don't get them early and educate them well, they may not be able to overcome a lot of those deficits, though I never want to ever give up on any child at any stage in their development. So providing all of our children a healthy start and quality early childhood experiences in first-rate schools with first-rate teachers and stimulating high-quality out-of-school time programs must be the first order of our business. And let me just say, I just encourage everybody these days to stay out of law school and to go into education, because I think it is the battleground. We don't need a whole lot more lawyers, but we do need a whole lot more teachers, and teachers who are minority teachers, and teachers who love children. And I cannot, again, stress too much the importance of adult expectations in the classrooms, high expectations for every child. These children have so many problems in their lives, they don't need to come to school and face another problem. They need adults who are going to love and respect them and expect them to learn and never give up on them. And so you just have to keep saying and reminding yourselves of that every day. And we also have to hold not only ourselves accountable for those around us who are accountable. If we know that there are bad people in the classrooms, get them out. Children see through what adults are doing. And let's just make sure that we hold ourselves accountable for what our children are getting. I've already talked about the need to not be fearful about criticisms. Please just be courageous. When I look back at the courage, and I hope that you will all see the Freedom School documentary, that is the Freedom Riders documentary that is out now. You look at the debate, look at the courage, and see how we can think about having 10% of that courage with the kind of problems that we face every day in our schools, but it's as important as what they did in an earlier era to end segregation in public accommodations and public travel. Lesson 5. For safety's sake, travel in pairs, better in communities. We've got to kind of build bridges. None of us can do it alone. None of us is the answer. Charters are an important part of the answer, but we've got to leverage charters and your example to change the quality of what goes on in all public schools, which is where 90% of the children still are. So let's just see how we can work together, and let's make sure that we pull along people, but we must not let ourselves be siphoned off or think that we have the only answer. Lesson 6, which I like a lot, is remember that the Ark was built by amateurs. The Titanic was built by professionals. The experts for children are parents and its citizens, and we must wrest the ship of state from that very small group of experts and powerful and greedy corporate pirates who recklessly have jeopardized all of our lives for personal gain. Let's reach out. Let's build a community movement. Let's build a broad voice for children and the movement we have to have. The final lesson from Noah's Ark, and I'm almost done, is to build our future. Build our nation's future. Build our children's future on higher ground. The whole premise of the civil rights movement was that our children would have a better life than we had. My last case in Mississippi was Miss May Bertha Carter, a brave woman in Sunflower County, a good friend of Mrs. Hamer, who wanted her 7 younger children, and they were sharecroppers, to have a better life. And she understood that that meant having an education. And she came to me and she said, would you take my case, and I want to apply to get my children in the Drew, Mississippi public schools, in the white schools, the former white schools. And I said, I'd be delighted. We won that case. Miss May Bertha put her 7 children, they were the only black children in their classes in those Drew municipal public schools, and they were harassed, they got pushed off their plantations, they suffered violence, they lost their jobs, but those children stuck it out. And every one of them graduated from that white school, and they went on to Ole Miss in Mississippi State, and they all became middle-class professionals. And 7 years ago, I got a call from a mutual friend of Mrs. Carter to tell me that Miss May Bertha's grandson was now in Parchment Prison. I said, Miss May Bertha Carter's grandson can't be in Parchment Prison. Her sacrifice, her witness, her struggle for a better education system, and that's the school district that's now in conservatorship, and we're trying to figure out how we can go and play a role in that turnaround that has to happen to honor her legacy. But how could we let it go back so quickly? How can we let on our watch this be the first generation of children of all races perhaps, but of minority children and children of color who will not do as well as their parents? Where have we been? Where is our voice? Where is our movement? We have got to build and leave our children and our grandchildren a better life and a better world than we found, a more hopeful, more productive, more unified role, and that's why we've got to have this movement. I want to end with a story in my hometown because Reverend Love called me up about 6 months ago in my home rural county in South Carolina with an unemployment rate of 22%, and the 2 largest employers are prisons, federal and state prisons, which are growing, and told me about a conversation he'd had with 3 black boys, 12 or 13, like the one I met 40 years ago. And again, we've made big progress. There's a revolution that's occurred in Atlanta, and we can do it again, and we must do it again, but we must think high, we must work together, we must be determined, we must say that our children have got to come first, and we have got to be that voice within our classrooms, within our schools, within our community, and then as a part of a bigger national transformational movement. But he told me he talked to 3 boys and asked them what they wanted to be when they grew up, and the first boy said he wanted to work at McDonald's. And the second little boy said he wanted to be Spider-Man. And when he pushed him for a real-life occupation, he could not think of one. And I realized that many of our children have never seen anybody work. And we've got to, if we want to try to make sure that children value education, we've got to also make education pay. So we've got to deal with jobs and hope and make college and achievement education pay. So you can't separate out a segment. And the third little boy said he didn't have to worry about it when he grew up because he wasn't really going to reach adulthood. And he drew with a stick on the ground and showed a boy dead. And he said, I'm going to be dead before I grow up. That's not Dr. King's dream. That's not America's dream. That's not a dream or lack of dream and hope that we can let any child have. And so I think we're at a pivotal moment. We've got a robust debate going in education. You have great voices. And I would just like to end with one of the great lessons that kept me going from the first time I heard Dr. King speak in Sisters Chapel. When it was in the middle of the sit-ins, we just had finished our sit-ins, and I went to City Hall, and I didn't go back to City Hall after going to jail from there until Andy Young was mayor. But the fact is, our sit-in ended and set into motion the end of apartheid in public accommodations in this city, and it was just an extraordinary experience to go back. As a kid who had gone to jail to open up City Hall's cafeteria, to sit there at the top of that building with Andrew Young, the mayor of Atlanta, and we know what he's gone on to do. So we can make a difference. We can make big differences if we plant our seeds. And Dr. King just stressed the importance, regardless of the atmosphere on the outside, of never despairing Our job is to speak the truth. Our job is to get the message and the stories out about what children need. Our job is to build that movement and to build the citizens for that movement every day in our classrooms and in our community. Don't pay attention to the externals. Just do what is right and plant your seeds. And his sermon that I remember as a 20-year-old sitting in Sister's Chapel was, keep moving. That if you can't fly, drive. If you can't drive, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But never give up, never despair. Keep moving, keep speaking the truth. And that's where I think we are. The need for your voices in this moment is so important. We can make a difference, as you are making a difference every day, by providing high-quality education and a belief in children that they can win, that they can learn, that they can be anything and do anything. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And let me just end with a brief prayer. Because we have pushed so many of our children, God, into the tumultuous sea of life in small and leaky boats without survival gear and compass. Please forgive us, and please help our children to forgive us, and help us all to recommit ourselves every day to give all of your children the anchors of faith and love, the rudder of hope, the sails of health and education, and the paddles of family and community, to keep them safe and strong when life's sea gets rough. You're doing the most important work that you could be doing. You're doing God's work. And so you stand up and you keep at it.